Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. It's a beautiful evening outside and we haven't done a garden tour in a while. So let's take a walk and see what's going on with the garden. So if you remember our last garden tour, the peas were very tiny. They've grown a lot since then. And actually, you can see some of them are starting to get ready to flower in here. Peas are one of those plants that always seems to take a really long time to get going, but once they flower, you have peas almost right away. I don't know if you can see in here because they're really tiny, but I've got some little calendula seedlings. I've kind of got those scattered all along where the peas are. So over here you can see my spring blush peas. I'll see if I can get a close-up of them. You can see they have this really interesting kind of purple around the stem, which is really pretty. These peas are supposed to be green with a little bit of a purple blush. So you can see that even in the foliage, it's giving a little hint of what the peas are going to look like. And you can see inside these leaves here that kind of look like they're stuck together, there's going to be a little pea blossom. So those will be blooming for us really soon. You can see over here my chives are glorious. Look at those fluffy purple flowers. These are beautiful, and these are completely edible too. These are really delicious in salads. So a lot of times if I'm having a fresh garden salad with some lettuce, I'll pluck off a couple. Let me show you here. These kind of separate out into, see all these little individual flowers that make up this flower cluster? You can kind of pull these apart, and these are delicious in salads. They're kind of oniony, but mild and a little bit sweet. I definitely recommend eating them if you have chives. All right, so let's head on into the main garden and we'll take a look at what we have growing. So you can see I opened up all these beds that have this netting covering them. I opened them up so we can really take a good look at them. Now this bed's grown quite a bit since our last garden tour. This is a mix of kale, cabbage, and cauliflower. So lots of different brassicas. Now I just gave all my brassicas a good dose of fish emulsion fertilizer this evening. So be thankful that you can't smell this garden tour along with me. It smells a little fishy in the garden today, but the plants really love it. And we'll talk a little bit more about why I did that tonight when we get to the broccoli. Now I've got something kind of sad to show you guys. Look at these little stems here. If you watched the seed planting video that I put up a couple days ago, you know that we planted cucumbers along this trellis here. Somebody apparently thought that they were a little bit too tasty. So I actually did go ahead and replant all of these. And I'm going to get some diatomaceous earth to sprinkle on the ground here to try to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Now on a happier note, we also planted these zucchini seeds in that same video, and these look beautiful. These just came up like 2 days ago. I mean, look how fast they grow. These things are huge, and I'm going to have to thin these out because these all came up and I can't have this many zucchinis growing too close together like that. You'll see back there against the trellis, there's some cucumbers and melons growing along the trellis. So we've got 2 types of cucumbers and 2 types of melons. I'm going to link that seed starting video for you so that in case you missed it, be sure to check that out. There's a lot of good tips about growing plants from seeds in there. You can see I have 3 tomatoes growing along this end of the trellis. And I've put some random little transplants in here in various stages of health. I've got some basil here, nasturtium. I like to mix in lots of herbs and flowers along with my vegetables. I think it keeps the vegetables healthier. It definitely keeps the pollinators happy, and it makes for a lot more interesting of a garden. And so I've kind of mixed them here and there. Now, as I said, they're not all looking amazing, but I think that being planted in the garden outside in this healthy living soil will really help perk them up quickly. Now here's a little more of a happy outcome from the planting video that we did. I've got lots of bush beans that came up really nicely growing here. We've got 3 different varieties, 2 rows of each down here. They haven't all come up yet, but I think that they will because the first ones just came up. Now over here, there's another little zucchini, and then there's a clump of 3 huge zucchinis over there. So again, I'm gonna have to thin these guys out. I've got some nice dill. I like to interplant dill with my zucchinis because they attract a lot of pollinators, and because they grow kind of tall and skinny, it's a good companion plant for squash, which kind of spreads out. I'm a really big proponent of putting a lot of flowers and herbs in your vegetable bed along with your vegetables. Now, initially, when I first started gardening, I wasn't always like that. because I do have a limited space and I just wanted to make the most use of it possible. I wanted to grow as many vegetables as I could cram into that space. But as I learned more about beneficial insects and as I learned just more about gardening in general, I realized that it's really not wasted space, especially if it's a plant that has an additional use. Like that dill, I can harvest for dill. I can harvest the seeds or the seed heads. I can harvest the seed heads when I make pickles later in the year. And flowers are great for pollinators, and they just make your garden more alive and more of a beautiful place to be. When you kind of have a monoculture, which is basically a lot of one plant growing together in one place, it's really easy for pests to find it. So pests find it and then just all lay it out for them. There's just everything that they want to eat all together. If you kind of intersperse different types of plants, there's more of a chance that they're not going to be able to find all the plants, or that something that your plants have attracted will eat them on their way to finding the other plants. So along this trellis here, you can see that our pole beans are coming up really nicely. So we've got on both sides of the trellis here, these are a little bit behind. These were a little slower to germinate, but you can see these are coming up too. A few haven't germinated yet, but I think that they will. And those are looking really good. Now let's move on to this bed here. Tomatoes. So this is going to be one of my favorite garden beds this year, of course. You can see I've got lots of companion plants mixed in. I've got lots of basil. I think I planted something like 40 basil plants this year, which some people might say is overkill, but I mean, it's basil. So now I've got a few lettuces down there that overwintered. If you saw my lettuce harvesting video, you saw we harvested some of that lettuce together. I'll link that video down below too, so you can check it out. Now down here, I have a basil that is not super happy looking. This one looked really good until I got out in the garden, and I'm not sure what's going on with it. If you have any suggestions for this, please let me know, because this is a lettuce leaf basil. It's supposed to have really big, beautiful leaves, and I was so excited about this. So I really want this to thrive. So if you have suggestions about what might be going on here, please let me know. I think some of it might just be the stress of moving outside, but if there's anything else with that, then I would definitely like to be able to fix it. So I've got these lettuces here. These are all overwintered from last year. On the other side of the bed, I've got a couple cherry tomatoes here. These are growing in cages because they're cherry tomatoes. They don't need quite as much support as these big slicer tomatoes over here need a lot more support. And so I'm growing them on this trellis. As you can see, they're pretty much standing upright on their own right now. But once they get a little bit taller, I'm going to be tying them to the trellis, and I'll show you that when we do that. Now you can see this lettuce here. I've been harvesting this pretty heavily, so it looks a little ragged because I've ripped half of its leaves off. But these are starting to bolt, which isn't really surprising because we had a couple days of temperatures in the 90s, which I don't know what's going on with our weather this year. It was winter until halfway through May. Now it's like the end of May and it's summer, so we barely had spring. But anyway, so this lettuce overwintered from last year, so it was kind of on borrowed time anyway. So I think that little bit of heat just pushed it over the edge. Over here on the other side of the tomatoes, you can see I have a lot of bare space. This is one spot where my peppers are going to be. I haven't planted peppers out yet. Peppers are a little more sensitive to cold than tomatoes, so I'm going to wait to plant them out for a little bit longer. You can see my scallions are blooming, and this bumblebee is just really excited about it. Look at that guy. Hard at work. He's finding so much pollen. So I usually cut off some of my scallion flowers. I have not actually done that this year. You can see that the flowers are pretty abundant. But I leave some for the bees. These are edible just like the chive flowers. And I like to collect some scallion seeds, so we leave some for that too. Now in here is all the lettuce that this is all the lettuce that I planted closely this year. You can see we've been harvesting from sections in the lettuce here. There's still quite a bit. I just watered this, so it looks a little bit draggled from water coming down from above on it. But you can see it's really nice and healthy. We've been harvesting that, and we'll be continuing to harvest it for a little bit. You can see I have some mosh that's really gone a little bit crazy back there. So mosh is like this tiny little plant. It's like a couple inches wide, and it's a flat little rosette. You eat that, and when it goes to seed, it all of a sudden turns into this enormous plant. It's like it just can't contain itself any longer. So I'm letting that go to seed because I want to collect the seeds. Now here's something I am very unhappy about. I found this hole in my lettuce bed along with some the absence of some lettuce that used to be here. And you can see my beautiful dark red lettuce that I found at a nursery. This just tempted me with its beauty, despite the fact that I did not need it. And somebody stole half of it. So I'm not too happy about that, but I have yet to find the culprit. So as you can see, we've got lots of lettuce here. I took one of these and moved it. I'll show you that when we get to that. Figured I would hedge my bets, hoping that I at least get some harvest, because I am hoping to be able to save seeds from this because it's just so beautiful. Now you'll see as we go through this garden tour, and really as we go through this whole gardening season together, you'll see that I have just as many failures or experiments as I do successes. And really, it's not really a failure if you learn from it, because there have been so many years that I have, like, quote unquote failed at something, but that just showed me what I needed to do the next year to succeed. And so sometimes it's not really a failure, sometimes it's just a lesson that needs to be learned. And so I saw a meme the other day that really spoke to me, and it said something along the lines of, the secret to my green thumb is growing so many plants that nobody can tell when I've killed half of them. And I was like, yes, that is exactly it. Now, when people ask me how I'm able to grow certain things, or if people think that I'm a good gardener, I do have a fair amount of success, but I have just as many failures. And the thing is that I just grow so many things that I'm bound to at some point succeed at something, right? So kind of, if you play the odds and just grow so many things, even if you have a low success rate, you're still gonna meet with some success. So basically, just keep trying, grow lots of things. I mean, you saw over there with my cucumber seeds that the heads all got eaten off. And so that's already a failure right there, right? But I replanted them, and I'm going to keep replanting them. And I'm determined to outwit whatever creature that was. And we will hopefully be rewarded with some delicious cucumbers this year. All right, so let's take a look at this bed that looks a little bit of a hodgepodge and kind of a mangly mess right now. But I'm gonna show you what we have going on. So this is kale from last season that's overwintered, and I am just letting it go to seed because I'm hoping to collect some seeds from this. You can see it's a nice big plant. I've got, well, a few plants actually. And again, there's a bumblebee. I don't know if you guys can see him. Bumblebee enjoying the flowers there. And I want to show you guys over here. You can see that I have some of the flowers bagged, and over there's some more. And the reason for that is that I want to be able to save some seeds from this kale, and I want to know that it's true to type. I'm just letting all these other flowers bloom because I have multiple varieties of kale blooming in this garden. I'll show you, well, let's see down here. Here I've got some scarlet kale. The other one, the really tall one that we just looked at, is blue curled Scotch. But basically what happens, these are blooming at the same time. If a bee visits this plant and then visits this plant here, there's a good chance of cross-pollination. And while in some cases, an accidental hybrid can be really interesting, and I'm okay with some of that happening. I mean, you can see I have the majority of the flowers exposed here. But I want to be able to collect some seeds from each plant that I know are going to be true to type. And so I did bag a few of each type. Now, those will be getting pulled out as soon as I need the space for peppers, which will probably be pretty soon. I'm going to try to leave some to go to seed and pull out the rest. Now you can see I have tomatoes here. These are going to be growing on this trellis. Here I've got a tomato kind of almost intertwined with another kale. This is like a ragged jack or a red Russian kale, and I really want to be able to save seeds from this, but I don't know if it's going to make it seeds fast enough before it starts interfering with my tomato. I may have to rip it out, but we'll see what happens. Now you can see I have some wild clover growing in here. I kind of just left that as a mulch. I do need to finish mulching my tomatoes. I haven't gotten very far in that process, but we will be getting to that soon. So you can see I've got a few kinds of basil here. Got some radishes. Those guys are almost ready to harvest. They're looking pretty good, although it looks like something else is already harvesting them and enjoying them. Now you can see here, this is the other end of my kale, cabbage, and cauliflower bed. I've got 2 tomatoes down here. Now in my tomato transplanting video, I did mention that this is a determinate tomato here, and that's a cherry tomato. So unlike all my big slicer tomatoes, these are going to be grown in cages. Now a determinate tomato is different than an indeterminate tomato. Basically, a determinate tomato has a certain size that it's going to reach during the growing season. It has a certain amount of fruit that it has the potential to set. So this tomato is not going to get that tall. My indeterminate tomatoes could be 6 or 7 feet tall by the end of the season, depending on how the season goes, but this guy won't get that tall. So you can see I have a cage here. I do not recommend these cages for indeterminate tomatoes, but for determinates and for cherry tomatoes in a pinch, they'll work too. Now you can see I've got a nice beautiful kale plant here. Got a nice cabbage. Now I've never grown cabbage before. This is a first for me, so I'm really hoping that this will head up and give us some nice delicious cabbage. I've got a few companion plants in here. See a little baby calendula and a couple other little basils and onions kind of interspersed with my cabbage, kale, and cauliflower there. Now there's a few plants that I've never really had success with, onions being one of them. I keep trying every year because I figure eventually I'll figure it out. So hopefully this is the year that we'll finally get a decent sized onion harvest. In the comments, leave me all your tips on growing onions because I have not been successful. I'm generally not successful with root crops in general, with the exception of garlic. So please just leave me any onion growing tips that you have. I would love to succeed at that eventually, but hopefully this year. Over here, I've got my cherry tomato bed. I've got 6 cherry tomato plants in here of, I think, 6 different varieties. You can see I have these kind of mulched. This is dead chickweed. If you saw my tomato transplanting video, you saw that this bed at that time was completely overrun with chickweed. So I ripped it out, let it dry, and then I put it back as a mulch because I read that chickweed is a very efficient scavenger of nitrogen. And so in theory, all this chickweed here, this chickweed mulch should be really rich in nitrogen, which should hopefully be decomposing and depositing this back into the soil. You can see here I have a spicy basil plant. It looks like he's trying to go to flower, so we can't allow that. He's still too little. So I'm going to come out and harvest some of this a little bit later. Got another kale plant. This overwintered from last year. You can see that this one has almost finished blooming. It's setting its seeds. So in a couple weeks, these should be ready to harvest. I did not bag this one, so this could be cross-pollinated. We'll find out. I have a random garlic over here. I'm not sure where this came. Well, I grew garlic here, but I'm not sure how I missed harvesting that one. It looks like it was a small little clove. So we'll see what happens with that. Now over here, this is where I'm intentionally growing garlic. And the garlic patch always gets a little bit wild and crazy this time of year. I don't see any sign of garlic scapes yet, but we should be getting them really soon. So when they do appear, I'm going to show you guys what they look like. I'm going to show you how to harvest them, and then I'm going to show you all kinds of delicious ways to use them. Because if you're growing hardneck garlic, softneck garlic will not give you scapes, but hardneck garlic gives you that bonus harvest. And it's not something that you want to let go to waste because it is delicious. You have to cut it off the plant either way because if you leave it on, it's going to sap some energy of the plant and prevent your garlic bulbs from getting as big. So if you're cutting it off anyway, you might as well make use of its deliciousness. So back here's my broccoli bed. We planted this broccoli together maybe a month or so ago, and it's looking pretty good, but I found something that I'm actually not super happy about. Look in here. You can see it's starting to get a little bit of a broccoli head. Now the reason I'm not happy about that is because this plant is really not as big as I wanted it to get before developing a head. So we're going to see what happens. This is a new variety that I've never grown before. And when I looked at it, it actually was recommended for fall growing only. So I don't know if that's why it is starting to bolt a little bit early and make its head a little bit early. We'll see what happens. The plant companies that I buy from were all sold out, or they all didn't have my normal broccoli variety in stock this year, so I'm trying something new. So we'll see what happens. If it doesn't do really well, then we'll try growing it in the fall. So on a positive note, this variety is also recommended more for all of its side shoots rather than its main head. The side shoots are what the broccoli develops after you harvest the main head. So I will show you that after we harvest the main head. And let's talk a little bit more about our broccoli plants. So in my broccoli planting video, when we planted broccoli together, we talked a lot about how to get your broccoli plants off to a good start. But one other thing that you need to do that we didn't address in that video because it wasn't time yet, when you first see the very first sign of a head there, you can see it's tiny, it's a little baby head, but it's just starting. So when you see that, you want to go ahead and fertilize your whole broccoli patch with something like fish emulsion. So that is the reason why I fertilized all of my brassicas tonight with fish emulsion fertilizer. I figured if the broccoli was starting to get heads, the cauliflower, well, my cauliflower plants are tiny, so I really hope that they're not going to get heads anytime soon. But I figured that it wouldn't hurt any of these brassicas. Brassicas are very hungry plants. They really like to eat. They really need a lot of nutrients. Now, I'm looking in here. I don't see any sign of a head in this one. This one is a different variety, so that's a good sign. Hopefully this plant will get a little bit bigger before it decides. Now, one other thing that was really not all that helpful when it comes to my broccoli was, as I mentioned with the lettuce, we did have a few days where the temperature just shot above 90. It had really been in the 50s and 60s for a while, and then we had some days in the 70s, and then all of a sudden went up to about 90 degrees out of nowhere. And so my plants weren't really prepared for that. And so I'm wondering if that might have something to do with why my broccoli is going to... So when a plant is first growing, it's focusing its energy on growing the plant itself. It's working on growing its root system. It's working on growing its leaves. At some point in that plant's life cycle, it is going to switch into fruit or seed or flower production, depending on what kind of plant it is. And that is called, when you're growing a plant that you're growing for the leaves, such as lettuce, or that you're growing for the flower, like broccoli you really grow for the cluster of flower buds. That's what the head of broccoli is. It's a big cluster of flower buds. If we just let it go, it would turn into kind of like my kale with a giant yellow cluster of flowers. So anyway, when a plant that you're growing for part of the plant itself turns its energy into flower and seed production, it's called bolting. So that is what my broccoli is trying to do right now. It's decided it's done growing its plant. It's done growing leaves. It's done getting bigger. Now it wants to turn to reproduction. And so it's trying to make flowers, which it's hoping to then eventually turn into seeds. And now, in the case of broccoli, that's not always a bad thing. Just if it happens too early, which I feel like might be happening in the case with my broccoli this year, if it happens too early, you're not going to get as big of a broccoli head as you would if it waited until the plant was larger. So that's why I'm not super happy about it, but we're going to keep an eye on it, and it might end up being okay anyway. And at least we will get some harvest from it. And broccoli, cool season crops are kind of great because you can grow them in the spring and then you can grow them again in the fall. So if they don't do well for you in the spring, you have another chance to try again in the fall. So I'm just going to show you guys a few more things. I have a few more things around the yard that I really want to show you. That's really all that I have in the vegetable garden for right now, but I do have a few other things that I'm really excited about. So let's take a walk around the yard, and I'm just going to show you a few more things. So look at this. How exciting is this? I've got baby blueberries. So in my area, blueberries are ready usually around July. So we'll see what happens. Now I have a confession to make. If you saw my first garden tour, you know that I had 6 blueberry plants. And I mentioned that we had not gotten a harvest out of any of them yet, and I was hoping that this would be the year. Take a look at this guy over here. Got some blueberries on this one too. Isn't this a beautiful plant? So the time came when my blueberry bushes should have been flowering if they were going to set fruit this year, and they did not flower. Because this is the 3rd summer that we had with them, I was really hoping that they would flower this year, and I was kind of disappointed that they didn't flower. I was at Home Depot and they had some really nice looking blueberry plants that were in flower. And so I just kind of mentioned to my husband and kids, like, hey, I would kind of, more than I want flowers on Mother's Day, I would kind of like some new blueberry bushes. And so technically when you plant a new plant like that, a new fruiting plant, you are not supposed to let it fruit the first year. But I am breaking the rules. I may regret that, but we're going to see what happens. And so this way I'll at least get a few handfuls of blueberries this year. So drop your tips in the comments about protecting blueberries from birds. I don't want to do anything that's going to harm the birds, but I do want to make sure that we are able to finally get a harvest of blueberries from our yard. So just let me know what you do. These plants are pretty small, so I would be able to cover the entire thing. What I'm leaning towards doing right now is covering my entire plants with insect netting. I don't want to use bird netting because I've heard too many stories of birds really getting trapped in the netting. And as I said, I don't want to hurt the birds. I just want to keep my blueberries for me. Now on this arch trellis here, You can see I have a trellis that's over by my mostly ornamental fire pit area. I have planted some things at the base of it. Let's see if anything's coming up yet. Got a few morning glories just starting to come up, but I did also plant a few Kajari melons over here and a few Vortex green beans. So my reason for planting those over here, well, you know, I have a few reasons. One is that I just can't control myself when it comes to planting everything that I want to plant. I have a really hard time narrowing things down. And so I was like, well, I have more space, might as well use it. The other reason that I decided to plant some of those plants over here are because I would like to save seeds from them. And if I plant them over here, this is far away from my vegetable garden, this will be the only melon variety and the only pole bean variety that I have growing over here. So they're guaranteed to not cross-pollinate. So those seeds will be guaranteed to be pure and to come true to type for the plants. So I wanted to plant a few over here and try to save seeds from both of those plants this year. Take a look at my raspberries. This is exciting. They're getting ready to bloom. You can see all along this raspberry patch, I've got lots and lots of raspberry plants, and they're all starting to set buds. You can see there's a nice little bud cluster here. So pretty soon these are all going to turn into delicious red raspberries, and this is my favorite fruit, so I cannot wait for this. Now these blackberry plants are new this year. You can see that they're starting to put off some new green growth, so that's really exciting. That means they're settling in nicely. I've got 5 of them all along the length of this fence here. Now I did shoot a video of planting these blackberry plants. I have not posted it because I'm unsure if I'm going to, because it was such a windy day. The wind was ridiculous. There's so much wind noise in the background. If you guys want me to post that video anyway, let me know and I will post it. But just know that it is not going to be the best sound quality. I just couldn't wait for a calm day because these came in the mail. They were live plants, not bare root plants, and so I had to get them in the ground right away. But this is the variety, Caddo Blackberry. This is an upright thornless blackberry. I chose this variety because it's upright and thornless. I like the idea of not having to trellis it, and I like the idea of not having to deal with thorns. So if you have any experience with this blackberry variety or with any other upright thornless varieties, let me know. Leave me your tips in the comments. Hey girls, enjoying the sunshine. Last little bit of time out before bed, right girls? No, they see me and they think that I have treats for them, but they've already had plenty of treats today. Sorry girls, I'm done for today. Now this is my new permaculture area, all down here. And I really love this area, except for one big problem. Take a look at that. So that is poison ivy. That is growing in my woods on the other side of the fence. And when I planted this permaculture area, it was dormant. There were no poison ivy leaves. So now I have a problem. I obviously can't allow that to stay there. I'm not sure how to get rid of it. Let me know what you would do to get rid of it, because I don't have goats. I do not want to spray a chemical if I don't have to. Although I will if that's the only solution and I can find a way to keep it out of these plants that I want and to keep it only on the poison ivy. But I mean, look at it. It's ridiculous. There's no way I can allow that to stay there. And just ripping it out by hand is not really an option either, because we're all allergic to it. But anyway, let's focus on happier things. Let's take a look at this permaculture bed, which I think is starting to settle in really nicely. So over here, we've got my second raspberry patch. These raspberries here, this is called the double gold raspberry. And these are the most delicious raspberries I've ever tasted. And oh look, one of them's flowering. That is exciting. These berries, I'll try to put a picture up on the screen. They're they're technically a golden raspberry, but they're really a beautiful blush pink coral color. And they're so delicious. So I will show you guys those when we harvest them. These plants are pretty new, so this is going to be, it looks like we're actually going to get a good harvest this year. Last year we just got a handful of berries, so this should be our first real harvest. You can see these are a couple plants that kind of grew up outside the fence, so I dug them up and put them into a better location. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this little walk around my yard, just a little quick garden tour tonight. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come spend time with me and just to see how my garden's doing. I hope that you enjoyed this tour. I look forward to just touring the garden more as the season goes on. And honestly, this is really going to give me a little bit of motivation, I think, to really keep on top of stuff. If I know that I have you guys holding me accountable, then I'm going to be that much more motivated to actually take care of things in a timely manner and not let things get too out of control in the garden. So I hope that you will hold me accountable, and I hope that you will hold me to that. But thank you so much for spending time with me. It means so much that you guys chose to take time out of your day to spend time with me and to see my garden. And I hope to see you again soon. Bye guys. I'll see you later.